Okay, so hello, good morning. So there are now 16 of you, so we'll start our class. So today we'll be talking about guidelines for housing developments. I actually shared this with my students in design yesterday because this is related to your design plate. Yesterday you already had a plenary session on the design plate, and most of this will is applicable. Okay, but for those who were under me design, although I'm presenting this again, but I'll be talking more about details here because yesterday we only discussed in very broad strokes what only appears or what only affects the plate. Okay, so if you notice yesterday in the background, I mentioned there that the developer wanted to put up an open market subdivision. So because there are four types of classes in terms of housing when it comes to when it comes to housing, yeah? And they all depend on how much the house would cost. So, for example, in the one extreme in socialized housing, uh, in horizontal development, which are subdivisions, so 450,000 and below is the cost of the housing unit. But for vertical development, it's 400,000 and below. So vertical development refers to um, your previous plate, for example, the walk-up apartment or the condominium. Okay. And on the other extreme, you have the open market housing. So this refers to um, houses constructed at the cost of more than 4 million. There are actually subdivisions that stipulates that houses to be built in the subdivision should cost more than 4 million to make sure that there's no some standard or um, cheap 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 looking house within the subdivision because they wanted it to really look opulent. That's part of the maybe um, of the environment that they wanted to promote, and so people are attracted to it. So people who also um, buy properties or houses in the subdivision are expecting also that their neighbors are affluent as they are, and so they expect a lot of things, no? High standards. Now, under these columns are the regulating laws. So BP 220 is Batasang Pambansa 220. So that regulates the social housing and economic housing. And it's called the Socialized Housing Act. And on the other side, regulating the medium cost housing and open market housing is PD 957 or the Presidential Decree 957. This is the Subdivision and Condominium Act. Okay, so this is like a summary of the two acts. Now, you might ask how you would know the cost of the house. Okay, so I got this actually from Facebook. There are people who have a lot of time on their hands, so they make this infographics. Um, so if you're just building a bare unit, you can use the estimate for cost to estimate 15,000 per square meter. On the other side, if you're building something luxurious, that's 35,000 per square meter. But this is actually basic luxury. Okay, so it's not there's still the high-end luxury, uh, which can go up to, so depends on the budget of the owner. So this is like the minimum for luxury. So later on, we will, so well, you will be able to compute, of course, the area of your house or the house that you're going to build, and then you multiply it by 35 or more. Um, and then That's the time that you get to know the cost of your house. So in terms of project location, it's the same for all classes of housing, that the site should be in suitable sites for housing and outside potential hazard prone and protection areas. We have no problem with this in terms of your plate because thanks to the group, because it went through site selection as part of our project. And yes, I did not mention to you that we're actually going um, to use your project for the plate. No? Um, For land allocation, I mentioned there in the brief that 70% will be for saleable and 30% non-saleable. Okay, for the non-saleable, I also mentioned that it is important that parks and playground is really required for all developments. Whether you add more community facilities doesn't matter, but there has to be a parks and playground. But then you need these guides to know the minimum that amount of land that you will have to allot for parks and playgrounds. Oh, sorry. So if it's 20 lots per hectare, so it's only 3.5%. But the 3.5% is not the 3.5% of the 30%. So it's 3.5% of the 1 hectare, of the 100%. Sorry. Okay. But then you would probably ask, sir, how would I know whether I will have 20 lots? Okay, so it's very easy because we have a 1 hectare property. Well, actually a little bit more. So, and then you take away 70% of that. So that would be 7,000 square meters. And then allocate it to the different types of houses. So single detached is 40%. So that would be like 2,800 square meters. And then 30% for each of the row house and the duplex. So that's around 2.1%, when 2,100 square meters each. And then later on, we will encounter the minimum lot area for each of these type of housing for the single detached, for the duplex, and then for the row house. So you just divide, say for the single detached, you divide 2,800 square meters divided by the minimum lot area for a single detached house, and then you come up with a number. Okay, and then you do that for the rest, and then so you add all of them, so you come up with the density, and then you can choose now the gross area for parks and playgrounds. You can also allocate a community facility, but there's a mandatory provision for a community facility such as a neighborhood multipurpose center, okay, for housing area with housing projects with area 1 hectare and above. Um, this is a multi-purpose center, therefore it can be used for anything. It can also be used for like a chapel. They can hold mass, they can hold meetings, they can hold seminars and trainings there. Okay. So one thing that is important since the project. Oh, by the way, if you notice the title of the project is the plate is medium end housing. When actually I made the program, it was really for open market housing. But then it was our coordinator for design, Architect Presas, who placed the title of medium end housing. So I pointed this out after the plenary and told them that there might be confusion in terms of the type of housing, whether it's open market or medium cost. And in the end, we actually agreed that it should be just open housing because we cannot control really the cost of the development of the houses. But some of the teacher might have not. I don't know. No, you have to check with your teacher. about the expectations, whether they expected it to be medium cost or open market. Anyways, um, going back to open market housing. Um, so these are high-end subdivision. And what happens when there's a subdivision project is that the owner of the land might not be the developer of the project. So they might be different persons or they can be the same person. But if they're different, so they have a joint venture, they partner, and then when they already sell all the houses, all the lots, so they don't get to be the owner anymore of everything, no? Because the houses and the lots have been sold out. So what happens is that the buyers form an association. It's called a homeowners association. And the homeowners association is the one that manages the subdivision. Okay. Um, so if the owner and the developer or both wanted still to have control over the subdivision, what they do is that they make sure that they still have the majority of the shares, or at least in this case, I think the share is computed to the land, okay, the property that they own. So, for example, if the 30%, which is the non-saleable, is the ownership of the original owner or the developer, and then it happens to be uh, not the majority because someone else has bought so many properties, no. So the owner has to buy also some other properties so that they have the bigger share, and then end up renting out the properties. Anyway, the point here about the homeowner subdivision is that um, the more high end the project, the the more complicated the operation becomes in terms of maintaining the subdivision. Therefore, the homeowners association might end up actually hiring staff members, okay, office staff, and in which case they would need an office. And the most logical place to put an office is here in that multipurpose center. Of course, when it becomes a high end, that multipurpose center becomes a bit complicated. Also, it can become a clubhouse, for example. And aside from being one one space for multiple activities, they can have different spaces for multiple activities, for varied activities. That is why if you've been through a high-end subdivision, even the clubhouse sometimes are open to outsiders um, for a fee or for some membership fee, I think. So they have sports facilities, they have restaurant facilities, and then they have privileges for the homeowners, and then of course extra fee for others who are not homeowners. So we're not talking here of just a shed, okay? But maybe if it's an economic housing, maybe medium cost housing, and also in socialized and economic housing, and even in some medium cost housing, the the homeowners function like they work for home, work at home, um, because they cannot afford. Uh, because that actually means every homeowner has to pay a homeowner's fee, you know, to pay for an extra office, for the staff, for their salaries. Okay, so um, people in the open market housing would not mind paying, but those in the medium cost housing would probably mind. So they try to put the cost as low as possible so they don't actually maintain an office. So whoever becomes the president has to use his house as his office and use the family members or the people in their house as the staff. Part of the non-saleable area are the roads. Next meeting, we will be talking about circulation system. So we will be dealing more on how to design the road system making use of all these types of roads. So you have here major roads, collector, minors, and even motor court, alley, and pathwalk. So we'll talk about how to design with all of those. But here, at least you will know that for each type of housing, class housing class maybe, um, you have the minimum. Again, it's minimum, okay? For open market, 10 meters for major roads and 8 meters for minor roads, so no need for a collector. If the area is only 2.5 hectares and below, so this applies to your plate. If it's bigger, so you have actually collector roads and then wider roads for the rest. ROW means right of way. This is road right of way. Sometimes it's called RROW. It's the property. It's the property outside the private properties, no? The property allocated supposedly for the road, but it's not only allocated for the cars, no? Because the part of the road used by the car is called the carriageway, which we see here to be 5 meters. Um, and then the rest can be used for a planting strip or the sidewalk. Okay, so all of those are within the road right of way. So this is what I meant earlier. So there is a minimum lot area depending on housing class and depending on the type of houses. So for single detached, for a socialized housing is 64 square meter. On the other hand, open market housing is 120 square meters. So if you divide 2,800 square meter, which is the 40% of the 7,000 square meter, which is the 70% of the 1 hectare. So if you divide that by 120, you come out with the number of single detached properties or housing units. Okay. Um, Aside from the lot area, there's also the frontage of the lot. Okay. Um, but here, for single detached, it depends on the type of lot. So here there are 4 types: corner, regular, irregular, and interior. Regular lots are the ones with one side facing the street, but then the other sides probably are adjoining other properties. Okay. So for regular lots, it's 10 meters for both medium cost and open market housing. Now, what are the other types of lot? But before that, so we have here a 4 meter for the row house, so very small. No? So it's a bit of a challenge actually to design a row house because I think the configuration of a row house inside has been fully exhausted. So it's just a matter of really how to make it look different outside. Um, oh, it's not here. Okay. So anyway, because I have an infographic on the types of uh, lots, so it comes up later. So you'll be arranging the properties in a blocks surrounded by streets. So even the length of that block is regulated. So you can only go as long as 400 meters, and then if it exceeds 250 meters, so you have to put an alley somewhere in the middle. So, but if it is less than 250 meters, say your block is 245 meters only, so there's no need to put an alley. Okay, so normally an alley is like 2 meters. Although in 2 meters, some cars can fit in, but it's mostly for walking and some other smaller vehicles like motorcycles. This is the same slide earlier. Okay, so this is not related to your plate, but This is also part of the rulings that if you have like a parallel public road and then right inside are subdivisions projects, and then it so happened that the subdivision project, whether it's only one or there are more, decided to buy property to convert it into a road so that it becomes a connecting road for to a public road. So after the subdivision is finished, the road can be donated to the government so that the government takes over its development. So if it's now public road, so the government takes care of maintaining it and developing it to cement, put drainage and utilities and etc. Otherwise, it becomes the responsibility of the whoever gets to own that land. No? Because, for example, there are four subdivisions in this picture, so there are four owners. So they have to like incorporate themselves and become the owner of this property, which becomes the road. So they have to shell in for the expenses for that road if it's not public. Since you're going to design a gate, please remember to put a shoulder for the transportations. This is for drop-off for vehicles like jeepneys and any private vehicle which decides to just drop off whoever passenger there is instead of bringing them inside the subdivision. So the minimum dimensions are here. It's 3 meter wide and then 5 meter long. Um, these are all minimums, okay? So therefore, there's this mentality, especially in some government offices, that the minimum is like the maximum. So and then so below minimum is like your mm, like your extension, like the social social extension program like that. No, it's like your way of giving to the poor to allow them to go below the minimum. So no, it's actually the minimum is not even the best, no. But we set that the government's actually supposed to set that as minimum where the person can still be comfortable and everything should work. So that's actually the threshold for like your charity towards ever or to the poor or what, no? Because if you go down below that, you're actually making people suffer. Okay, so that's why you can do more than the minimum. Okay, there is the standard is supposed to be comfortable, and then there's minimum below, which is allowable. And then sometimes there's a maximum, but if only the minimum is set, so you can go as big. No? Because sometimes we complain like there's a very big development, it's even commercial, and then we ask, and then suddenly the sidewalk is only 60 centimeters on one side, and so we ask the DPWH why is this happening, and their answer is that because that's the minimum required by law. Okay, so it's minimum, therefore that means um, you can still go bigger. No? The sizes of the streets should go in proportion with the whole development. Okay, so subdivision projects shall have provisions for future expansion where applicable by designating minimum interconnecting roads right of way of 10 meters. Okay, now in some projects, so they leave behind another portion for future development. So they have actually roads that like end up on walls or fences because the idea is that it will continue on. Okay. Now the site that we're using from the group of students in your class, no? It's actually 2 hectares originally, but we decided to just use the lower half, the 1 hectare. So there's another hectare actually beside it. But so it's up to you in your design whether you're going to provide like another road that will connect there later, or maybe just treat the extension as another subdivision. Anyway, it's accessible to the barangay road. Okay, so hierarchy of roads is similar to what we showed earlier. And there are also road specifications. I mentioned to you about the road right of way having planter strips, which is the PS here, and the sidewalk, which is the SW here. So we mentioned earlier that in the open market for 1 hectare, so we have a major road of 10 meters, therefore zero point 0.8 of that is for planting strips. This means it will be divided into 2.4 for each side of the road. And the same with the open market housing. I mean the sidewalk, this is 1.2, so it will be divided 0.6 for each side of the property. So that leaves behind 6 meters for the carriageway. And down here are the materials that will be used, concrete or asphalt. Now, these are the types of lot that I mentioned earlier. There were 4 mentioned earlier, but here there are 7. So there was a corner lot, a regular lot, an interior lot, and I forgot the one. Let me just check fast. Irregular lot and interior lot. Okay. Now, there is no irregular lot here. So a irregular lot is something with which is not rectangular or square. Okay, but the side facing the road should be 6 meters at least. That in that portion. So here we have a corner through lot. This is very rare because most planners would not want to design it this way. Okay, most planners would design a lot and then there's another lot behind it at least. An end lot is the one at the end of the road. If you don't consider the alley here, inside lot is similar to the regular lots. So it's open to one side, on one side to the street. Interior lots are accessible only by a right of way. So they are lots which have another lot in front of them before the road. So they have to get part of the property in front of them. They have to buy it so that they have access towards their lot. This infographic is poor representation because there's an easement of the side, so that could have been like a right of way also. So just imagine it to be surrounded with properties all around. Okay. Through lot, this happens when you buy those lots, no, the one your lot and the one behind you, so that you actually have streets at the front and at the back. So I know a lot of homeowners who do this. If they have money, they can do this. Now we will also have a special lecture about the utilities, okay, in a subdivision. And you might be wondering, why are we focusing on subdivision? Shouldn't we be focusing on site planning only? Actually, this is part of the coverage, no? Because we're not only talking about one building in a site. So as long as we have a private site, any development inside the subdivision, housing or commercial or industrial is covered in planning 1. So therefore, we will be talking about all of this: water supply, electrical supply. So I will not discuss this now. We will revisit these slides later when we talk about them, including drainage sewage disposal and garbage disposal system. Now, when it comes to garbage disposal system, I remember yesterday there was a question about what are the types of um, spaces, what are the spaces inside the house that should be considered, whether they should, you should be researching that, and that was actually the answer. Now you should know already by now, since you have projects, residential projects since last sem. But what is not mentioned is that in an open market housing, uh, the community here is really very, sometimes very strict, with high standard. They don't want to see garbage. So everything has to be efficient. So if there's a garbage truck or garbage collection system, either by the subdivision or the barangay, there has to be a garbage bin accessible at the street so that the garbage collector can easily access them and throw, and then keep from, and also keep closed from other possible uh, but animals or people scavengers, no. So the garbage bin or garbage, what do you call that? It's not bin, but anyway, garbage storage uh, is something that you should also provide in your house. It should be located in front, possibly hidden. So you have to find a way to design it so that it doesn't look like a garbage bin from the streets. Otherwise, your neighbor will complain. Earlier, we had the minimum lot area. So here we have the minimum uh, area for the house. Okay, so for single detached and open market, if you remember, it was 120 square meters. But the minimum area for the house is only 42 square meters. Of course, you can go beyond, you can go more. So you multiply that by 35,000, I don't think you can come up with 4 million. Um, Therefore, you have to multiply it with a bigger amount. So it has to be more luxurious. No? If you go beyond your setbacks, you'll have to provide firewalls. And someone asked about the row houses, what they are. So the row houses look like this. So they are small units for attached to each other, you know, in a row. And then the firewall also is regulated. How far you should extend from the wall. That's 30 centimeter, and above the roof. Okay, so it's 30 centimeters also. This one, so the minimum level completion is actually based on implementation. So you cannot be, because you have to ask for approval from the government. So for subdivision housing, and then they don't give you the certificate to operate if you do not comply with this, no? If the houses are not complete, or if the shell is not complete for socialized housing. Now for setbacks, you see here, for socialized and economic housing, it is just 1.5 meter in front, and then 1.5 meter at the sides, and then 2 meters behind. But for medium cost and open market, it depends on the national building code. Okay, so which is more complicated, that's why I have to put it in the next page. Abutments mean that part of the house which go beyond the walls. Okay, they may extend towards the setbacks as long as they're not a enclosed space. It's not a room. Okay, so I will referring to parts of the roof, like the roof eaves or the balconies or some other projection, because you have a wall lamp, for example. So you're not going to count that, no? From the property to the wall lamp, 2 meters. No, it has to be from the property to the face of the house which is enclosed. Okay. Now sometimes you can have a carport which makes use of the setback so that you have to provide a uh, what do you call this, the firewall. So the setbacks depend on the type of development, whether it's R1 all the way to R5. So what are these? The next slide will actually give the definition. But for now, R1 is actually what applies to a subdivision for small for houses, individual houses. So therefore, the frontage is 4.5, the sides is 2 meters, and then 2 meter also for the back. Now, there are a lot of things here written in the notes. You can just review them when I share the slides with you. So R1, low density residential zone, characterized mainly by single family, single detached dwellings with the usual community ancillary use on a neighborhood scale, such as executive subdivisions and relatively exclusive residential communities, which are not subdivisions. So you either have a subdivision, a big property subdivided, or you can have still a residential community. So each homeowner bought their land uh, individually on their own, and then somehow a lot of them now are clustered residential units, so it becomes called a residential community. So there's no one actually organizing them together to form as a subdivision. So they don't have a homeowners association, so they're immediately under the barangay. So for R2 to R5, you can probably just read this up, no? So they can start up from dormitories to apartments to all the way to medium rise or high rise condominium. Our project last semester, last before midterm, the first plate actually falls under R4. It should have been R3, but it was between R3 and R4. But since it has uh, just qualities which are more than R3, so it becomes R4. Okay. Now here are infographics. Also, I also took this from Facebook. So it shows you all the setback requirements depending on the type of uh, residential development. For this is for R1, and then there's are also for sorry residential 2 basic, residential 2 maximum. So you have to read the National Building Code what differentiates an R2 basic from an R2 maximum, also an R3 and R4 basic and R4 maximum. Um, so you can actually have a one side firewall or two sides firewall. Of course, for row house, it's always two sides firewall. Okay. So economic housing. So abutments, I referred to you earlier. So you can extend further, but not beyond, say, 0.75 from the property line. Okay, because with that 0.75 on your side and 0.75 on the neighbor will sum up to 1.5 meters, which is also the required distance between the abutments. Okay. So therefore, if you have a projection like a balcony, so it's okay as long as it does not go beyond 0.75 from the property line. If it goes beyond that, like the roof of a carport, so you have to provide a firewall. So this is how a duplex look like. If this unit faces the other side, similar to this unit. So they are all facing one side. So it's not a duplex anymore. It becomes a single attached. And this is how a row house looks like. But bear in mind that you're supposed to design a two-story row house. So for socialized housing, it's almost the same. It's smaller, the row house, the duplex, and then the row house. Okay, so these are provisions the um, for the firewalls. Okay, so please wait for a while. Okay, I'm back. Okay, so if you have a firewall on one side, so you do not actually make a firewall all the way from the front all the way to the back. So you only take up 80%. So it depends on the type of development. If it's an R3, you can have those two firewalls, but only 85%. Or you can have the one at the side and also at the back. It's not allowed to have three sides and much more for the four sides, no, to have firewalls. I remember one project that went viral is the project of that actress or celebrity who said that she did not need an architect to build her house, and she showed it very proudly. But it's like the house is taking up the whole property already. Okay, so a lot of professionals, a lot of architects pointed that out. It's not supposed to be allowed, but then she was able to build it. So in the Philippines, we do a lot of magical things. So you can just study this. Now, in last for the plate one, Architect Abasuaras gave this lecture on development controls. So basically, this is just a review, but then I'm not going to give you explanation also of this because you can read them and then it's very easy to understand. So these are the setbacks. So you have terms like AMBF, allowable maximum building footprint, and then you also have TOSL, total open space within the lot. So inside would be the building footprint, then outside would be the open space. But even the open space are divided into two. You have there the unpaved, uh, what is surface area, and then you have also the impervious surface area. So and then there's a table in the National Building Code that tells you how much percent should be unpaved and how much can be paved. Why is this? That's why even in the plate number one, I would react when you pave the whole property, you cement the whole property. Um, so I did not mention this anymore because it was not, it should have been mentioned earlier. But there's a percentage because if we pave the whole property and it rains, so the rain does not penetrate the cement, so it has to wash away towards the street or maybe towards your neighbor. And then if the canal cannot handle the volume of water coming from all of these properties which are fully paved, so flooding occurs. Okay, so it's not only for flooding, so to minimize flooding that we leave some space unpaved so that soil can be absorbed or water can be absorbed by the soil. It is also for recharging the aquifer. So we have a water table beneath the soil, and then we have to recharge it because we're also getting water. Okay, so if we remove, if it depletes, what actually happens is that the soil above it can cave in, can go down. So that's why it has to be recharged. The table is actually very long, that's why it extends here. There's also a limit to the height of the building, and for R1 that's 10 meters, which means you can go as much as 3 floors as long as you don't exceed 10 meters. But doing that, your roof has to be flat. Okay, but if your roof is not flat, because for example in this plate you're only required to do 2 stories, so your roof probably is a hip or a gable, and then to measure 10 meters you do it from halfway, from the tip of the ridge to the top of the roof beam. So halfway through that is where you start measuring all the way to the established grade. Now grade is the ground, okay, the ground line. Um, Normally, the ground line is supposed to be the middle or the 00. I think I mentioned this, I don't know, in graphics. But the 00 should be the center of the road, okay? Because the way the road is designed is that it is higher at the center, so that if it rains, the rain would go to each side of the road, okay? So normally that's the 00, and that's supposed to also be the grade of the property. Now, if you have a paved surface, so the cement, the concrete pavement would rise above the ground by say 4 inches or 10 centimeters. But then you do not start um, measuring from the top of the paved surface. You start measuring from the grade, from the ground. So that's a grade line. In some developments, you might notice some very tall buildings where the lower part of the building is nearer the front, and then the upper part precedes. Okay, it's because they have to comply with this requirement. There is an angular plane um, for the building. So depending, say this is R1, depending on the road, say 10 meters, and then there are projections or no projections, so say 43 degrees. So this has to be 43 degrees, and the building has to be within this line, this angle. It should not go beyond that. Okay. So the reason for this is that to allow the sun to at least penetrate through the development, aside from the fact that it sanitizes what it hits, it also makes the place look safer. Otherwise, if it's all covered in shadow 24 hours, so it would be like a Batman movie, with a lot of criminals around. Also, the wind is like the streets are like your ducting system for the wind to flow. Okay, and then they get distributed. So they should be allowed to also penetrate the lower parts and then to travel along the streets. Um, this is also allowable. There's also the volume that has to be considered, no? And that's it. Very good. It's a long, uh, it's a long lecture. Um, so wait. Next meeting we will have a short quiz about this. I will be sharing the slides with you probably after lunch. Um, and then starting next week also, we will be um, I will be checking the attendance. Actually, I'm checking the attendance now, but it's not because it will be graded. I just wanted to know really how uh, whether some people are not attending, because some people might be not submitting assignments or quizzes, but they're attending. But there are those who are not at all attending nor submitting anything, and I need to know so that I can ask if there's any problem, and how we can probably help them. Um, so actually, I downloaded an app that checks attendance. So is there any questions? So anyway, if there are questions, just feel free to contact me. And also, by the way, I think there is one or there are two persons who have not taken the departmental the midterm exam. There is only one. Okay, so whoever you are, you know who you are. Um, I can still allow you to take if you ask for it. If you do not ask for it, I will not allow you to take. That's a very simple rule. Okay, so only for those interested. Um, so that's it. So thank you for coming, and then see you next meeting Thursday for the lecture on circulation design. Okay, so I'll just turn off my video. So goodbye and have a great lunch.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you,
Thank you,
sir.
sir.